He tricked the SS, saved Jewish lives, and was thrown into prison for it. When he escaped, he ended up hiding in a convent among Catholic nuns. The whole time, he dreamed of one thing: living in a Jewish country. But when Oswald Rufeisen finally applied to move to Israel, he was denied, even though he had been born Jewish. Because during the war, while hiding in that convent, he had converted to Catholicism. And now, he was petitioning Israel's Supreme Court for citizenship as a Catholic monk named Brother Daniel. So Israel had to decide, can you be Christian and still belong to the Jewish people? Oswald Rufeisen was born into a traditional Jewish family near Krakow. To his Jewish community, he was Shmuel, because for as long as he could remember, Rufeisen dreamed of immigrating to the Jewish homeland. He devoted himself to the Zionist youth movement, waiting for the day that he would join his comrades in Palestine to build the Jewish future. When the Germans invaded Poland, that dream gave way to one directive: survive. So when he stumbled across a set of identification papers on the side of the road, he grabbed them immediately. These documents identified their owner as a Christian, allowing Rufeisen a freedom of movement denied to his fellow Jews. In November 1941, Rufeisen made it to the town of Mir, just days after the SS slaughtered most of the town's Jewish population. The terrified, grieving survivors crowded into the ruins of an abandoned castle, surrounded by armed guards. An old castle sounds glamorous. In reality, it was hell, another ghetto that bred fear and disease. Rufeisen was horrified by what had happened in Mir. But when he heard that the Germans were seeking translators for the local police who only spoke Russian, he jumped at the chance to sabotage the SS from the inside. It was the perfect opportunity. Rufeisen spoke both German and Russian fluently, without a trace of an accent. Armed with his language skills and his stolen papers, the Jewish 19-year-old did the unthinkable. He got himself recruited to the German-controlled police force. Once he stepped into the lion's den, he was no longer just another Jew on the run, but a spy who had infiltrated the enemy's inner circle. His people were trapped and terrified, but he could stroll in or out of the ghetto whenever he wanted. It was there that he spotted a couple of Jewish men he recognized. They were quietly organizing an underground resistance, and Rufeisen wanted in. With his access to the outside world and his insider knowledge of the enemy, he was the perfect liaison to Mir's tiny Jewish underground. For 9 months, he carried their messages to the resistance movement outside the ghetto. But these coded letters weren't the only thing he carried. Under cover of night, he smuggled in whatever weapons he could scrounge, knowing full well that every mission could be his last. If the Germans discovered their translator was working with the Jewish underground, they would shoot him, or worse. In June 1942, Rufeisen overheard a chilling conversation. The Mir ghetto was to be liquidated on August 13th. Everyone inside would be deported to concentration camps or murdered on the spot. The meager arsenal of weapons he had smuggled into the ghetto wouldn't be enough for the resistance to mount a real defense. Starved, emaciated, and under-equipped, the fighters were no match for the Germans, and they knew it. But Rufeisen had a daring plan. If it worked, hundreds of people would live. If it failed, the entire ghetto would pay the ultimate price, and so would the translator with the perfect German. As the Germans prepared for the liquidation, Rufeisen rushed to the police chief with urgent news. Russian partisans had been sighted nearby. Nearly all of the policemen fell for his tip, chasing after partisans who didn't exist. With the ghetto left virtually unguarded, everyone who could run escaped through a hole in the fence, leaving behind the young, the sick, and the elderly. Nearly 200 Jews managed to escape that day, though many were rounded up within the month and executed. The remainder found refuge in the forest, fighting with the partisans. At the end of the war, only 50 of Mir's Jews were left alive. Rufeisen's diversion had worked, until it didn't. Because when the police returned empty-handed to find the ghetto mostly deserted, they immediately suspected their translator. Without a convincing explanation, Rufeisen confessed everything. "I am neither an enemy of the Germans nor a Pole. I will tell you the truth because so far I have always worked with you openly and honestly. But nevertheless, I consider the planned anti-Jewish operation to be very wrong, for I myself am a Jew, and this was the only motive for my action." As he knew they would, the Germans immediately threw him into prison. But Rufeisen had managed to build real friendships among the local police force. The guard assigned to watch him let him slip away, reporting him only after he had a head start on his escape route. Rufeisen raced through the streets with soldiers in hot pursuit. Desperate, he threw himself at the doors of a convent, where the nuns hurried him inside. Outside the walls of the convent, the world was on fire. But inside, Rufeisen found something like peace, though grim possibilities raced through his head. He had no idea if the escape plan had worked, if anyone from the underground was still alive. With nothing to occupy his time but his own dark thoughts, Rufeisen worked his way through the convent's library, starting with the New Testament. Since the first time since the war had started, the Holy Land didn't feel so far away. The refuge he had dreamed of was right there in his hands, unfolding page by page. He found comfort in the story of Jesus, another young Jew at the mercy of a brutal empire. According to the New Testament, Jesus had suffered terribly, but had risen again. Perhaps the Jewish people would one day be reborn after all they had suffered. The idea was so enticing that just 3 weeks into his stay in the convent, Rufeisen approached the Mother Superior with a request. He wanted to convert to Christianity. Until that moment, Rufeisen had pretended to be a Christian in order to survive. But there were no SS officers in the convent, no dangers at his back. This was a choice made of his own free will. For over a year, Rufeisen studied his new religion at the convent. The whole time, he feared that he was putting the nuns in too much danger. Once he felt secure in his new faith, he fled to the forest where he joined the partisan fighters, including some familiar faces who had made it out of Mir. He had gone into the war a Jew. He had come out a Catholic. When the horror finally came to an end, he faced a decision. Where would he go? Europe was in ruins. And though he was fully committed to his newfound faith, he had never stopped dreaming of the Jewish homeland. He knew the Carmelite order of the Catholic Church had a division in the Holy Land. Hoping to be sent to the new Jewish state, Rufeisen took his final vows as a monk. He was 27 years old, but he was reborn a Catholic. No longer Shmuel the Polish Jew, but Brother Daniel, a devout Catholic who, like his biblical namesake, had survived the lion's den. For 10 long years, the Carmelite order denied Brother Daniel's repeated requests to be moved to Israel. But finally, in 1958, he received the news he had waited for his whole life. The order had agreed to transfer him to the Holy Land. The Polish government granted him a travel document with one condition. He had to give up his Polish citizenship, which he did without a second thought. True, he was now technically stateless, but who cared? Soon, he would be living in his homeland, a citizen of the State of Israel. Or so he thought. After the Israeli authorities approved his temporary visa, he applied for Israeli citizenship. The law of return guaranteed every Jew the right to settle in Israel and claim citizenship immediately, with no strings attached. After all, the Jewish state had been founded as a sanctuary, on the promise that the Jewish people would never again be homeless refugees, eternal and unwelcome guests at the mercy of others. In his application, Brother Daniel described his intense love for the Jewish homeland, and his conviction that despite his Catholic faith, he would always belong to the Jewish people. I based this application on the ground of my belonging to the Jewish people, which I've continued to do although I embraced the Catholic faith. I chose an order which has a chapter in Israel, to travel to the land for which I have yearned since my childhood. But the Jewish state rejected his application. The law of return was for Jews. By his own admission, Brother Daniel was a Catholic. Shocked and despondent, Brother Daniel sued, arguing, quote, "My ethnic origin is and always will be Jewish. I have no other nationality. If I am not a Jew, what am I? I did not accept Christianity to leave my people. I added it to my Judaism." The Israeli government wouldn't hear it, but Brother Daniel's case forced them to confront an unwelcome truth. The law of return had never actually defined who is considered Jewish. Brother Daniel was ethnically Jewish. He had survived the mass extermination of his people, even resisted heroically. He felt Jewish to his very core, a member of the tribe who simply worshipped in a church rather than a synagogue. But the Israeli government didn't care about his feelings or origins. They insisted that once he converted to Catholicism, he was no longer a Jew, no longer part of the nation of Israel. The battle raged, and in 1962, Brother Daniel's case made its way to the Israeli Supreme Court. It wasn't just his identity at stake. The court's decision would shape decades of Israeli immigration policy and determine the fate of hundreds of thousands of Jews with complex identities who might one day seek to immigrate to Israel. After all, the Jewish people had been exiled for 2,000 years, and the diaspora had not been kind. Many people around the world saw themselves as Jewish, even if their families had intermarried or been forced to convert centuries before, or in this case, willingly left Judaism for another religion. The trial began in a packed courtroom. Nuns and monks in their habits sat beside Jews with kippahs and payas. Rufeisen appeared in his brown habit and sandals, his hair shaved into a monk's tonsure. The judges combed through page after page of rabbinic literature, Jewish law, history books, and essays by Israel's founders, searching for answers. Jewish law held that Brother Daniel was still a Jew. According to the rabbis, even a sincere conversion could never erase that status. The rabbis made it clear that being Jewish is more than just religion. If Judaism were only a faith, then converting to another religion would erase someone's Jewish identity, but it doesn't. An Israelite, even when he sins, is an Israelite, which shows that there's a national or peoplehood dimension to Jewish identity. At the same time, the rabbis held that full participation in Jewish communal life, the Kehillah, required returning to Judaism. You couldn't be a practicing Christian and still function as a full member of the Jewish community. That tension is what these Israeli judges were grappling with. But the judges felt strongly that Jewish identity was about more than just religion. Being a Jew meant choosing to identify with the Jewish past and the Jewish future. Could Brother Daniel truly share in the fate of the Jewish people if he had converted to another religion? And not just to any religion, but to the Catholic Church, who many of its members were responsible for centuries of forced conversions, persecution, murder, and charges of deicide. After 5 hours of debate, the court arrived at a decision with a 4-1 majority. The law of return was for Jews who identified as Jews nationally and religiously, not Jews who had voluntarily distanced themselves from the Jewish people by converting to another religion. Sure, Brother Daniel was a Zionist. Yes, he had saved Jewish people during the Holocaust. Yes, according to Jewish law, he was Jewish. But they argued converting to another religion separated him from the Jewish people, and they did not give him the right to Israeli citizenship. Brother Daniel was devastated. The court's decision felt like a denial of his inner truth, but he refused to let the rejection crush his dreams, even if it temporarily crushed his spirit. He spent the rest of his life at the Stille monastery in Haifa, conducting Mass in Hebrew and eventually becoming an Israeli citizen through naturalization. He remained connected to his Jewish past, regularly meeting with the Jewish survivors of Mir and even testifying against the very police chief who had once been his boss. Until he passed away in 1988, Brother Daniel continued to identify as Jewish. In his will, he wrote, "I don't know if I'm to be doomed or spared, but from all of the things you may know about me, I would like you to remember that I was born a Jew and died a Jew." But his story doesn't end there. In the wake of the Supreme Court ruling, Israel changed the law of return, defining a Jew as someone born to a Jewish mother or who has converted to Judaism and who is not a member of another religion. Sounds straightforward, but life and questions of identity are always more complicated. And though the Jewish state has held fast to the Supreme Court's ruling, blocking the immigration of various groups who identify as Jewish but practice Christianity, the core tension remains between individual identity and the state's responsibility to safeguard the collective identity and continuity of the Jewish people.